A region that runs almost directly through the middle of the United States of America has such a low population density that people are left wondering why. Most people living in the U.S. struggle to make ends meet. The eastern half of the U.S. of America is home to around 80% of the country's total population. About 20% of the population resides on the western side. The east coast of the U.S. is home to a significant population because this is where the country was founded. The land on the east side is also quite accessible, making it simple to develop and produce there. Building and maintaining a home in this area is simple due to its location. The west side was colonized considerably later than the east side. It faces a challenge in the form of large, rough mountains that make it impossible to construct anything there. A large stretch of land spans the states of Montana, North and South Dakota, Wyoming, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas that is virtually entirely devoid of inhabitants. Why does such a small percentage of people call this enormous region home in the center of the country? Why is a wide belt running down the middle of the page that is nearly devoid of content? This region accounts for around 12% of the United States. It's not that there are no residents in that area. Around 3.1 million people call this region home at any given time. Yet, this is dispersed throughout a relatively vast area and accounts for less than 1% of the total population of the United States. The Rocky Mountains are to blame, at least in part, for the region's low population. The presence of these mountains causes an effect referred to as a rain shadow, which prevents a considerable quantity of precipitation from reaching the region behind them and keeps the temperature lower throughout the winter. Because of this, the temperature in the shaded area is prone to rapidly shifting, which can be uncomfortable. Very sub-zero temperatures in the winter and sweltering heat in the summer. As the Arctic winds ride the mountain chains and scale the crests of the mountains, they will race down the middle of the country in a single day. Imagine a day in the heart of winter when the temperature is above freezing in the morning, but then drops below zero in the late afternoon. This day would fall under the category of a polar vortex. In Wyoming, not too long ago, the temperature dropped from plus 35 degrees to minus 15 degrees in about half an hour. This was the extreme temperature swing that occurred there. In this video, we are here to find out why such a tiny number of people reside in such a vast area in the middle of the country, and we will continue a little further. Although the United States is one of the world's largest countries in terms of its size and population, the population of the U.S. is not evenly distributed across the country. This is despite the fact that the U.S. is one of the largest countries in both size and population. Although the majority of people in the U.S. live on either the eastern half of the country or the west coast, there is really large belt of land in the middle of the country that is almost entirely empty. This is because most people choose to live on either the east coast or the west coast. This is because the following line explains why this is the case. While the majority of individuals in the U.S. call either the eastern half of the country or the west coast home, some people live in the middle of the country. If you have ever seen this snapshot, then you know that the eastern part of the U.S. has the majority of the country's population and infrastructure. However, while that is an interesting story in and of itself, what we are going to talk about today is a really large swath of land that runs from the northern border of Canada all the way down to the southern border with Mexico and is inhabited by a comparatively small number of people. This land runs from the southern border with Mexico all the way up to the northern border with Canada. The eastern half of the United States is home to a disproportionately high amount of the nation's total population. Before we move on to the international belt, we must first discuss the demographic makeup of the country as a whole and how it is dispersed. In point of fact, there is a line that can be drawn across the country that functions as a practical partition between the two sides of the U.S. that are united together. This line runs roughly parallel to the geographic center of the country. While around 80% of the country's population lives on the eastern side of this line, approximately 20% of the country's population lives on the opposite side of this line. This is mostly attributable to a confluence of circumstances, the most important of which are the nation's natural geography and the geographic setting in which it first came into existence as a nation. This purchase also lined beautifully with the Mississippi River watershed, which is a location that contains such a massive quantity of fresh water that it not only made it possible for agricultural land to be irrigated in a very simple manner, but also made it possible for trade and transit by ship. The recipe for economic expansion consisted of both simple agricultural practices and straightforward transportation networks. In 1803, the United States began the process of purchasing a vast tract of territory from France. This land encompassed a significant portion of what is now the Midwest and the western region of the country. In the same year as Portland, Oregon was incorporated as a city, Los Angeles, California also became a city in 1850. The argument that we are attempting to make is that the development on the West Coast was not all that far behind the development in the Midwest region. Still, it was hindered by the lack of swift and dependable transportation. This is the point that we are trying to make. These cities were, for the most part, allowed to fend for themselves for a significant portion of their early existence, and were essentially dependent on the ups and downs of industries related to natural resources. Cycles that drove early populations of people, such as the 1849 gold rush, to Northern California. As the decades went on, as transportation and livability technologies improved, other large cities were constructed and established as key population hubs in the middle of the country. For example, the gold rush in 1849 took place in Northern California. Boise, Phoenix, there is a wide belt that runs through the middle of the contiguous United States that separates two regions of the country that have not expanded all that significantly. If the population of one particular region is increasing at a quicker rate than that of the other regions, then there is a story behind that phenomenon. The population distribution of a country is usually an intriguing story. Between 1860 and 1900, the cities of Salt Lake City and Denver became incorporated. After that, development began in the western part of the country and the population continued to rise steadily. Although all of this is praiseworthy and admirable, there is one region in the U.S., Lubbock, Texas, and Amarillo, the state of Texas. The Midwest Texas, Abilene, South Dakota's Rapid City, which is located in the state of Texas, Bismarck, North Dakota, a state in the U.S. Both San Angelo and Odessa in Texas are included here. The number of people living in Texas cities and towns begins to quickly decrease beyond that point. If you're seeing a pattern here, you're exactly right. There are a few reasons why Texas has the vast majority of the belt's population. Now that we've established that, for its size and geographic position within the U.S., the belt is definitely underpopulated, the only question now is why, as with most things, there's never really a single answer. Instead, it's a confluence of things that form to make up the answer. So now that we've established that, for its size and geographic position within the U.S., the belt is definitely underpopulated. The only question now is, why it does not explain why the land was not substantially developed after that. A large part of the reason for that is due to the effect that the Rocky Mountain Range has on an area that is immediately to the east of it. You have to understand that the Rocky Mountains are responsible for what is known as a rain shadow effect. This effect causes moisture to accumulate on the western side of the range, precipitation to be reduced all the way through the range, and then there is no precipitation left over for the eastern side. As a direct consequence of this, the region is characterized by a climate that is predominantly either arid or, failing that, downright frigid. This indicates that any kind of actual agriculture, which was a key motive for settlement in the 1800s and early 1900s, was severely constrained. This was the case even though agriculture was a primary motivation for settlement. Yet there is one more factor that still keeps the population of Siamese flocking to this location. That factor is the dramatic temperature changes. Suppose you've ever heard of a spot where the temperature can drop from roughly 70 degrees Fahrenheit to 30 degrees Fahrenheit in the span of a single day. In that case, it's probably from this particular region or somewhere near it. The continentality of this area is largely responsible for this phenomenon. What do you think about the video? Please let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like, subscribe, and turn on the notification before leaving. Thanks for watching.